The Path to Authenticity is brought to you by GIA Miami. Founded by world-class mental health experts, GIA provides advanced care for difficult-to-treat conditions, including anxiety, medication-resistant depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Using state-of-the-art methods, GIA can help people recover from conditions when more traditional approaches can't. Dr. Antonello Bonci has assembled an expert team serving international clientele in a modern and resplendent Miami setting. If you or someone you love is suffering from depression, anxiety, OCD, or other mental health concerns, call GIA at 833-713-0828. You can learn more about GIA by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting giamiami.com.
Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are. First time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity, episode 182 for Monday, July 4th, 2022. Decided to release an episode a day early this year since it is Monday, July 4th, and just wanted to talk a little bit about that and how I'm feeling about that. This is one of those holidays in the States where we tend to have lots of great childhood memories and fireworks, all that stuff. But I don't really feel like celebrating. I feel more like mourning. And I felt the same way last year in 2021, considering what happened on January 6th, 2021, which I believe, because I think I'm grounded in reality, that there was an attempted coup that very nearly succeeded. And what troubles me about that is that we all know he did it. We watched it. We watched him lie and say he won the election on election night when very clearly he was losing. And he lied and lied and lied and lied and lied and lied and lied, incited violence, sent people to the Capitol to interfere with the election, with the finalization of the presidential election, and he continues to lie. We all know what happened. I think some of us are delusional and think that he's being honest, which I can't imagine how any human being could think that Donald Trump, the liar of all liars, the bullshitter of all bullshitters, would be honest about this. Well, actually, I do understand, and I'm going to get to that. But to me, the question isn't whether he did it. The question is whether enough of us care to hold him accountable. And I'm afraid for us. I'm afraid that so many of us are so enamored with him and what he represents that we're going to let him off the hook, and that what he tried before, ham-handedly or not, he barely failed, and he'll try it again. And that we will become what we nearly became. Had he succeeded, this would be a dictatorship. No question in my mind about that. A fascist dictatorship. The United States of America. We're on the brink of that. We very nearly became that on January 6th, 2021. Which, back to the idea of how could anybody believe? What I believe is that we're a traumatized nation. Now, we may not be as traumatized as other nations, but we've had, since the inception of this country, many generations who've gone off to war, who have witnessed obscene violence, or even carried it out in the name of this country, and came back without dealing with it emotionally. You hear me talk about this all the time on this podcast, that we are an emotionally disconnected society. So what happens when we don't deal with our trauma is it gets passed on to the next generation. So we are a country that has suffered generations of trauma, intergenerational trauma. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the other armed conflicts that we've engaged in the last 40 years that we have opted not to declare war, but have carried out acts of war. Whether or not we were convinced they were right, trauma. And when children grow up in an atmosphere of trauma, they experience abuse. We are a society of survivors of trauma and abuse. So, in a society of victims of abuse, of course, if it's our parents who are traumatized and passing that trauma down in the form of verbal abuse, emotional abuse, whatever, of course we love our parents. And we convince ourselves, why this behavior is okay. So if you consider that we are a nation of survivors of trauma and of abuse, it doesn't seem that far-fetched that we might deify this sort of vaguely paternal figure who is a perpetrator. He is abusive. And if you've heard me talk about Donald Trump, politics aside, what I don't like about him is that he treats people like garbage. And so here we are, this society of victims, of people who have suffered trauma and abuse, cheering on the perpetrator. How often do you see people who are happy when they hear him talking down to someone? Cheering him on inside when we hear him mistreating reporters. So that's my theory about why he has risen and why we tolerate his bullshit. Because he touches something very deep in us. He touches something on a deeply emotional level. We relate to him. I'm not saying I relate to him. I'm saying a lot of us connect with him, relate with him, because he reminds us of somebody else who treated us like shit, who we loved. That's what I believe about why so many of us in America co-sign his bullshit. Anyway, I'm afraid for this country. I'm afraid for my son. And one of the things I wanted to talk about here is how I had considered this before having this conversation with my son. But after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Clarence Thomas said what he said about, hey, maybe we ought to look at gay marriage again. Maybe we ought to look at contraception again. Maybe we ought to look at what is legal and what is not when it comes to private acts between people who love each other. Because those were things he insinuated in his opinion relating to Roe v. Wade. Let's take a look at this stuff. Maybe we need to reconsider this stuff. That's what he's saying. So they took away freedoms of ours, and they're talking about taking away more that have clear and direct implications in the lives of people who I love. So the weekend after that took place, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, I had a conversation with my son where I suggested to him, maybe you should establish the goal of achieving dual citizenship. Maybe you should look into countries where that might be possible and where you might like to live. And if that's not possible, and if it gets bad enough, where you might want to live, where you might go, even if it requires you renouncing your citizenship. And this is a conversation I could have never imagined having with my son. And I told him, and it's true, I've considered it myself. Where will I go if things get worse? Because just like we all saw January 6th coming after the way he acted, after pretending he won this election and inciting violence and all that, that was a logical outcome. That was a logical eventuality considering what was happening leading up to it. And, with the way things are going in this country, it seems to me what might be logical is that we become a fascist dictatorship. We're already pretty close. Because, I've thought about this lately, the Gettyburg Address, Abraham Lincoln. He fought to keep the Union together, the country together. That was his primary objective. Eventually, he realized that abolishing slavery was going to be required to make that happen. and I can't remember it verbatim, but the end of the speech, I believe, he's talking about we need to do these things, that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Of the people, by the people, for the people. And again, if we're going to be grounded in reality, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, I'm afraid it has already perished from the earth. Most of us didn't want Roe v. Wade to be overturned. Most of us want gun control legislation. They're refusing to do it. They are refusing to do it. What they want is more control. And, the government of the people, our elected representatives, they don't give a shit about what we think. They're beholden to lobbyists. The gun lobby, the pharmaceutical lobby, the insurance lobby. Why do you think we don't have universal health care? Well, even if we don't have universal health care, if you feel like that's a socialist concept, why is it so expensive for us to take care of each other? Why is it that we live in a country where we tolerate people profiting off of another human being's illness? It's not right. It's profane. So they're not us, not of the people. It's of people who are getting paid. Not for the people, for the companies who are paying them. They're not working for us. And what we see generally when we see people get into politics, especially at the federal level, you see them turn. You see them, they get hip to the game, and they play it. And they play it to stay in office. And our founders never intended for politicians to serve term after term after term after term, lifetime politicians. They wanted a government of the people, for the people, by the people. Not of politicians, for politicians, by politicians. So yeah, dual citizenship, renouncing citizenship. And, the distorted thinking in this country and the cruelty in this country. I saw a post online one day last week. It was about Billy Joe Armstrong, lead singer of Green Day, is renouncing his citizenship and will be a citizen of the United Kingdom in response to Roe v. Wade. And I thought, let me just look at some of these comments. And there was one from a man who's always been in my life who I have no respect for. He is a 70-something fat old lech. He's a man who I happen to know his first ex-wife caught him masturbating as he stood looking out the garage window at a teenage girl laying in the sun next door. This is 40 years ago. He's an asshole. His comment, good riddance, let him go. Take all the libtards with you. Libtard. Dehumanizing language for people who disagree. Or I would argue people who are grounded in reality, or who are kind, or who understand that there is such a thing as institutional racism in this country, or believe in feeding and clothing the poor, believe in having a country whose arms are open wide to people who are subjected to cruelty from the country from which they originate. Call me liberal if you want. I try to be kind. I don't think of myself as a liberal. I think of myself as a humanist. Those guys would call me a liberal. People, I'm sure, do. And to them, that's a 4-letter word. I don't care. Yeah. So, it's cruel. And I just see so much stupidity. And I'm not talking about the populace. I'm talking about politicians. I saw a news snippet last week about a particular congresswoman, some commentary she made in response to Roe v. Wade and some of the other things that have been circulating since that happened, ideas of, taking away more freedoms. And there's this whole Supreme Court decision. They've made a bunch of decisions that just terrify me over the last 2 weeks. One of them is, saying it was okay for this coach at a public school to pray with his kids, which, listen, I pray. I don't have anything against prayer. I do have something against telling people they have to pray with me, or that someone at a publicly funded institution requires a participant or compels a participant to pray the way I pray. The right has bitched and bitched and bitched for decades now about how we need to put prayer back in school. And this particular congresswoman made a comment to the effect of, we need to let go of this whole separation of church and state thing. It's not even in the Constitution. It's just from some letter, some dumb letter. She's referring to the Federalist Papers, I believe. Does she not know that when white Europeans stepped foot on this continent, they did it to escape religious persecution? They weren't free to practice their religion where they lived because there was no separation of church and state. So I'm all for you praying. What I'm not for is you putting someone else in a position who believes differently than you to feel like they need to pray the way you do to belong. And that's because I want that person to have the freedom to pray how they pray, to believe what they believe. This is one tiny step away from them telling us what we have to believe. If there's no separation of church and state, there's nothing keeping them from telling us what we have to believe by law. Yeah. Just some dumb letter. We have a bunch of derelicts in charge. Angry, dumb people who have, taken on Donald Trump's playbook of talking down to people and being obnoxious. That's his big skill, big political skill, being obnoxious, treating people like garbage, dehumanizing people. It's sad. It's sad. So yeah, I don't really feel like fireworks. I feel like we need to pray. However we choose to pray. And when I get into this frame of mind, when I'm thinking about all this stuff, it's really difficult for me to not get super depressed and to not feel extremely powerless. And what I keep going back to is this idea that no, I can't control everything. But there's the song, Let There Be Peace on Earth, and let it begin with me. It has to begin with me. Peace has to begin with me. No matter how shitty Donald Trump is, no matter how shitty the right is, no matter how many times they call me or anyone else libtard, I'm not doing it. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to treat people with fairness and love. Because ultimately, all I can really control is what I do. And trust that my positive actions will affect other people positively. Let it begin with me. So, thanks for listening. This is something that I intend to do maybe once a month, do some sort of monologue like this. And I hope you've enjoyed it. Maybe you think I'm a libtard and you'll never listen to me again. Okay. Like, nothing I can really do about that. But this is me. This is who I am. This is how I feel. This is me being authentic. And I hope you're willing to do the same. Hope you have the courage to do the same. There are people who love me, who don't talk to me because they believe differently. I don't talk to them because they talk down to me. When we don't even have to talk about this stuff. You know, if you're somebody I care about, or if you're any human being and you believe differently than I do, especially politically, the last thing I'm going to do is tell you all the reasons why I think you're stupid. And that's probably, I think, for me personally, the worst thing that has come from political discourse in the last 20 years, since Fox News, really, let's be real. They've made this worse. They've created this. The right created this problem. There are people I love who just like scream at people online for having opinions that differ from theirs. Man, can we just all take a breath and realize that sometimes we're all right, sometimes we're all wrong. And if we just love each other and trust each other, it'll all shake out fine. Liberal or not, like, I don't hate this country. I love this country. I always will. That's why I'm saying none of this would matter if I didn't love this country. But, the right would have you believe that anyone who leans the slightest bit left really just hates this country and wants to destroy this country. When for me, the opposite is definitely true. I want this government of the people, by the people, for the people, to not perish from the earth. I want it to survive. I want people to be able to experience the types of freedoms that I've enjoyed my entire life. I have a close friend who lives in a very oppressive country where she's ordered books that have been confiscated in the mail. Poetry. Just because they don't want people considering different ideas. There are places like this on this earth. We have no idea how lucky we are in this country. So I'm going to shut up now and enjoy the rest of my day. So thanks for listening. I hope you've had a great holiday weekend. And I hope you keep coming back to listen more. Got some good stuff coming up. I have some changes in the works with the podcast. If you're paying attention, I've started rolling out this July journaling challenge where I'm sending out journaling prompts every day of the month. There's a link in the show notes if you want to sign up for that. But have a great day. Happy 4th of July. And I'll talk to you soon. Be nice.
That's our story. I hope you enjoyed the punk rock opera. And we have one last piece of music for you. It goes like this.
Okay, go. You cannot make us. We are the GIA Man. on these chords, simple beats. You wanna cheat, you wanna stop, you wanna tear us down. We are the bad plans, man, we got our roots stuck in the ground.
Generation, self-made bands. We cut our teeth with bloody hands. The rage has instilled in us. Can feed a crowd, give them a rush. Thank you. Good night.